Right, hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Area Planning Committee of City Council. There's only one item on the agenda today, so I think let's just crack on with it. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Fisher.
I am a member of the Campaign for Real Ale. While the Campaign for Real Ale have got a policy of opposing closure of pubs, I think we can say this pub has been closed for sufficiently long that I won't consider that in any way to be a matter of concern.
Okay, thank you. Missing two members this evening, Councillor Galvin and Councillor Wardby. So they've given their apologies, but neither substituted. Can move on then to the minutes of the last meeting. Everybody's happy for me to sign them as an accurate record. I can see a few nods. There's nobody registered to speak under the sort of general public participation remit of the committee, so I think we're happy then to move straight on to the plans list and the one item we've got this evening. So, Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a planning application to convert the currently vacant Castle Howard Ox on Townend Street into 16 student studio apartments with various alterations and extensions. I'll go through the presentation for members. So there's a site. This is Clarence Street up here, and Clarence Street, Wigginton Road Junction, just here. It's the property as it stands at the moment. Got Lowther Mews to the rear, which is referred to in the report, and this is number 3. Townend Street. And there's the view from Clarence Street. This is a tool hire premises, former garage premises that takes its access from both Clarence Street and Townend Street. Another view along Townend Street, Clarence Street at the end. And this is the view from the opposite side of Clarence Street, so outside the former Union Terrace Chapel, which is a building within the conservation area. The site itself and everything you see in front of you is outside of the conservation area. So they're the existing elevations. Existing floor plans, so the ground floor, pub entrance, former pub entrance here, accommodation on the upper floors. The proposed site plan, so the main entrance is taken from Townend Street. This is the converted building. There'll be extensions along the side, bin stores, bike stores, a setback on the front to allow bins to be stored on collection day. Proposed elevations. So this is a 2-story side extension, not single-story rear extensions. Not so clear on these drawings is the proposed infill. It's on a square off the building. For the photographs, members will recall, and the site visit we did last month, the building on this elevation terminates around about that point. So this bit here is a section of infill, new development. So street scene elevations as existing and as proposed. Floor plans, ground floor, first floor, and then 2 studio rooms in the roof space. That's it. So, and I say member, I'll go back to the proposed site plan, but if members have any questions or want to see any of the slides, let me know.
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to double check because I've got the papers from last month when it was deferred and then the papers from this month, and there's just a couple of slight variations between the wording in the papers. paragraph 3.1 in the first set of papers, the highway network management says submitted cycle shelter drawings provide 3 cycle stands at 1200 mil space, and that would be too cramped, and they suggest it should be revised to 2. That sentence has been taken out, so can we assume that that revision has been made and it is just 2 Sheffield stands?
Yeah, that's right. It was a revision that was made, and we had an update before the last meeting, but obviously we've now taken the opportunity to incorporate the update into today's papers.
Great. And I've got a couple of other questions that are not directly related to plans, which I can come back to if anybody else has got some questions about plans.
Has anybody else got any questions about the plans? Can't see any, so come back to Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify, one is obviously just a typo, but I think it's important to acknowledge. We seem to have 2 paragraph 3.10s, and then every paragraph subsequent to that in subsection 3 is labelled wrong, if you see what I mean. So I think that's obviously just where a paragraph's been inserted. But I did want to ask some questions just around paragraph 3.11 and 3.10, the second 3.10, if you see what I mean. So in simple terms, it's around the 106 agreement. And again, there's a slight difference between the 2 reports. I think the original report was talking about potentially a £10,000 106 contribution for City of York travel plan, and I think that subsequently was said to be not justified. In the original report, there was mention of a £2,416 contribution to amenity and open space. Then in the new report, there's also a 3,408 contribution towards sport provision and a £3,000 contribution towards removing this from the res park. And if you look at the conditions on page 37, the open space contribution is conditioned, the £3,000 parking contribution is conditioned, but I couldn't see any reference to the £3,408 community sports development or outdoor sports provision. And I just wanted to clarify that that was expected to be part of the contribution and therefore should be included within the conditions, in which case we'll need to amend. And if it's not, why not?
That's covered in 5.46 on page 36. So the last 2 sentences of that paragraph, we say that sports provision contributions aren't normally requested for student accommodation because it's considered that most students typically use the sports facilities provided by the university or college. So we don't feel it's a necessary requirement to enable the development to go ahead. In terms of the £10,000 travel plan, I think we might have over-edited slightly the highway network management comment so it reflected the update, but it's taken that request out of 3.1 and 3.2. We do refer to it though later on page 35, the final part of the paragraph 5.42, before you get to those 3 bullet points, that we didn't feel it was reasonable given the scale of this particular development, the fact that other parts of the requirements effectively make it a car-free development.
So just for complete clarity then, I think that you've explained it all very clearly there, I think, but so the condition as written is correct, and it's those 2 elements of 106 contribution, £3,000 res park and 2,000 whatever it was for.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Crackhill.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. On the waste collection, the provision for waste collection, I know what you said about the gate being inset so that there's a place to put out the bins. But I also note that on the website, I think the waste officer objected on the grounds that there isn't a place for the vehicle to stop and collect. Could you clarify that, please?
Well, I can clarify that that's what they said. We didn't take that comment any further because we wouldn't expect a development which is effectively a reuse of an existing building and only 16 units to provide on-site waste vehicle turning. There's also enough room on the street for a waste vehicle to stop, load up, and for cars to pass. And I know it's a temporary traffic regulation order at the moment, but certainly the amount of through traffic on Townend Street is significantly less than it used to be. So we didn't feel it was a necessary requirement and would take away a significant amount of the development if we required a waste vehicle pull-in area. I'm not aware of that ever being asked for on a scheme of this size.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that really.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be the vehicle might block the street or it might not. I suppose there should be just about room anyway. I just wanted to understand your view on that. The second one is, can you just clarify for me? I think I've studied these plans over and over, but my eye's not great. Is there a window in every studio?
Yes.
Just about.
I believe so. Just go through the floor plans.
Yeah. It varies, but there is. Except
So, yeah, I mean, some of them have, the outlook is slightly restricted across a walkway width, for example, but
and the ones.
Yeah, I can't see any. Well, there are roof lights proposed in the roof, so they will be conservation style roof lights inserted in that roof plane.
So they're in addition to the small existing windows at each end of the gable?
Yes,
Right.
they would be. I can't,
Yeah.
Yeah, this plan doesn't quite pick up.
Okay.
But yes, they also have, I didn't notice those, but they also have front and rear windows as well, yeah.
Okay, I see. And the lounge doesn't have any vertical windows like that, but it has a roof
It has a
light.
skylight.
Skylight.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can't see any further questions. Councillor Crawshaw.
Apologies. Just one point of clarification. I think I know what the answer is to this, but paragraph 5.23 says the proposed development would retain the original part of the building. A revised design of the proposed extension is simple and is not considered to result in harm to the designated heritage asset. I think, because it states that this is a non-designated heritage asset, that refers to the grade 2 listed chapel, that's correct. And it's not a typo that it should say doesn't result in harm to the non-designated heritage asset. Because it falls within the context of the grade 2 listed building, it says elsewhere in the report. So I'm assuming that that's the designated heritage asset. And this is saying it's not considered to cause harm to it.
No, I think that is a typo. I think that should refer to the undesignated heritage asset. That is the building itself.
Right.
Because 5.24 goes on to talk about the setting of the conservation area. and the listed building, which is the Union Terrace Chapel. So yeah, that's referring to the
So it's
building
to the
itself.
building
and an
itself as a
undesignated
non-designated
asset.
heritage asset,
Yeah.
and it's not causing harm. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we can move on then to our public speaker, who's Alistair Cliff, who's speaking in person in support. Joined as well by Nick Watson, who's the architect, if there's any questions. You'll be aware you get 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a warning at about 30 seconds to go, and if you'd like to make a start.
Thanks, Chair. The Castle Howard Ox pub has been vacant and in a state of disrepair for a number of years. Evidence has been submitted that the building has been marketed to continue its existing community use without success. The site is brownfield land, which is in a highly sustainable area of the city centre. Evidence again has been provided there's a significant and growing need for purpose-built student accommodation in York. As advised by the government and the NPPF, we have undertaken extensive and continued dialogue with your officers and consultees from initial pre-application discussions on the redevelopment of the building. These discussions have ensured that the proposed development would retain and sympathetically convert the original part of the building with the use of different materials, including white timber windows and render compared to the brick for the extension. This provides a clear understanding of the extensions are later additions and appear subservient to the historic building. As such, concerns from a conservation and design perspective have been fully addressed, as confirmed by the Council's Conservation Officer, and the development is considered to have a neutral impact on the heritage asset, respecting the townscape and streetscape. It's worth highlighting that the proposed development will achieve a BREEAM rating of excellent and reduce carbon emissions over policy of 32.3%, thus supporting the Council's climate change emergency. The covered, lit and secure cycle store has been developed in conjunction with highway officers to ensure that cycle parking is provided for a wide range of 18 cycles, which can easily be accessible to dock and retrieve the bikes. The proposed development will be managed under the successful Urbanite brand, which manages student accommodation in Glasgow, York, Leicester, and here in York at its Colliard developments. This should provide you with the confidence that the proposed development will be managed in a professional manner to ensure refuse collections will not block the pavement and waste and recycling is stored correctly. Changeover days do not cause problems for other residents. Security measures such as controlled electronic gates to external doors and the cycle store, maintenance of the development, and continuous student and local resident liaison. To conclude then, we would agree with your officer's report that the proposals fully accord with local plan policy and the National Planning Policy Framework and can sympathetically bring back into use a valued historic asset for an identified student need. We respectfully request that members support the officer recommendation and grant approval subject to completion of a Section 106 legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just ask if members have any questions. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you. Yes, you said just now that the development will be managed well with respect to local residents and any impacts. Can you, and you mentioned particularly the waste, bins going out and coming back in. Can you just explain how you do that? Because obviously it's too small to have people on site all the time, one would assume. So how does that actually work? Who does it?
Yeah, there'll be a management plan which will be conditioned, which we'll have to discharge, and that'll set out who will be coming on site. But really, it'll be up to the residents or the students to manage that, and it'll just be monitored. So that part of the management will be liaising with the students and the residents to make sure they are being brought back in once they've been brought back once they've been put back out, if that makes sense. There won't be anybody on site to manage that.
Right, so it'll be down to the 16 individuals, students in there to put the bins out and make at the right time, and then make sure they bring them back in afterwards at the right time.
This development is actually part of the first phase, which was Colliard 1, which is on Mansfield Street. And that development's managed by CRM students, and they have a full-time site presence there, and it's not far away. So this is seen as as almost a second phase of that development. So they'll be able to share facilities.
So someone could actually be called
So that
round
while there won't
from
be anybody
there.
on site at this one, there is somebody on site in York close by.
Right, okay. Mansfield Street, yeah.
Councillor
Through
Crawshaw?
that.
Sorry, is it? All right,
Just while Councillor Craggill's searching through some notes, on the same point, changeover day is a big issue. And obviously that's going to be where you're going to have a lot of cars in a very small space. And it is essentially the end of a road and it opens up onto a very, very busy road. How is that going to be managed? Is there anything in place to manage the fact that you don't have, I mean, it's not just 16 students, this is 16 sets of parents shifting 16 sets of stuff. I was wondering if you could give me any details about that.
Yeah, there is a management strategy, which is, as Nick said, combined with the coalyard on Mansfield Street. So I think it's from brief recollection of that, and again, we'd have to discharge that through the planning conditions. It'd be a staggered, to be honest, it'd be staggered throughout the day on changeover day. So all students be aware of when they can sort of get people to the site to change over. You are correct, though. It's obviously it goes on to a busy road. So you know the last thing this development is there to do is to obviously cause issues for residents, because it is in a it's in quite a residential area. So I think the benefit of this is because it's combined with Colliard and CRM and managing that extremely well. We're not aware of any complaints with that we can just use the benefit of that for this facility on Townend Street.
okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for joining us again this evening. I just wanted to get an understanding of the pub as it was existing in 2017 and what's been done in the intervening period, because obviously it was open and operating as a pub, and it was bought by a new operator and it immediately closed down and then has been closed since that point. And I believe, I'm not sure exactly what the timescale is, and perhaps Councillor Fisher might know better than I in terms of the pubs in the local area, but I believe there were 5 pubs in the Groves, and with the Punch Bowl having closed in September, there is now none. And so I just want to really understand, because policy HW1, as the report says, states that the loss of a community facility will only be permitted when they've been marketed for a minimum of a year without success. So first of all, I'd like to understand on what basis this pub was marketed. Was it marketed as a going concern, or was it marketed as a development opportunity? And why was it only marketed for 7 months and not for the 12 months, as the policy quite clearly states?
Yeah, so we submitted a marketing report as required under the policy, which set out that prior to the applicant purchasing the building, it been marketed as a pub since 2017 when it was closed, and the only bids or interested parties were all non-pub operators. So it is actually more than 7 months. It's 7 months since the applicant has taken ownership, and then it's obviously been transferred to this student developer. So it's been marketed, but obviously due to the industry and the general economic climate and the state of the building as well, it's in an incredibly poor state of disrepair. It didn't attract any pub operators bidding for it.
So if I may, just to clarify then, so you're saying that it was marketed for several months prior to 2017 when Star Pubs bought it?
No, sorry, just to clarify, from 2017, it's been marketed for more than 7 months, which is in the report that we sent across. Officially, in terms of when we received bids, it was 7 months, yeah, but it was actually in terms of more informal marketing. We just didn't have that evidence to put in the report at the time.
So the pub was open, it was bought, it was closed, and it was marketed
For 7 months, yeah. But there was Before that, there was an interim period, but we didn't have the evidence to put in the report, so that's why it does say
Right.
7 months.
And in terms of how it was marketed then, was it marketed as a going concern, as a pub that could continue as a pub, or was it marketed as a development opportunity?
It was
Because
marketed.
obviously there'd be a different price, won't there?
Yeah, it was marketed as a pub operation, but the bids that came forward were from developers.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, we have, as part of the planning submission, we were given details of the marketing details, and it was marketed as a pub.
Thank you.
Councillor Webb?
Thank you. It's just seeking a little bit of clarification around the actual build process, because I mean, it is only sort of an extension on this site, but it is quite a tight spot, quite a tight site. And have you got any concerns around the fact that that end of the street, not for long periods of time, but during the construction phase, do you see any issues? Are you envisaging any problems around access to the main street itself, or spilling out onto the road at all? What are your thoughts around that?
No, I don't believe so. Obviously, there'll be a construction environment management plan that we'll have to discharge, which will clearly set out to officers and the council of how we're going to minimise that. And so sort of, where's drop-off of materials going to be, making sure that they're not on the public highway or the public footways. So no, we don't, to be honest. From that, obviously, there's quite a bit yard to the rear that we can take advantage of in the interim before the rear extension's built out. So from a build process, it will be taking advantage of the rear of the existing building.
Yeah, can you just give me, you mentioned the cycle parking. Can you just give me a bit of reassurance about how this cycle parking works? Because obviously, in order to fit it in, you've got the bikes very close together, and presumably that's on the basis that you've got the two tiers, but it's quite an unusual arrangement, isn't it? Do you think it's really going to work, and are people going to be able to get that many bikes in there?
The cycle store has probably taken longer to agree than the building design on this one. We've had, I think we've probably had 7 revisions to it. So we have provided details of the racks. We've provided details of how the doors, the gates are held open while people fold down the racks. There's an electric charging point for electric bikes in there. Yeah, it's fully covered. We're confident it's fine, and yeah, it's probably one of the best design bike stores I think I've ever seen.
And getting the bikes in and out, if they'll all have to be standard bikes, won't
We've got
they,
we've got two types. The ones that you can see that look quite dense on the left, they're the double stacking bike systems, and then you've got the ones on the right which are a Sheffield hoop style, which for if there was anybody that was say struggled to be able to lift a bike, they'd be able to use the Sheffield hoops. So there's a mixture of storage options there.
Okay, thank you. And just secondly, following up Councillor Webb's questions about the construction, have you made some plans for where your contractor parking will be?
I don't think we have at this stage. No, I don't.
It'll be part of the.
Because it's obviously, it's a lot of res park around in the area, so
Yeah.
you would need,
I think the short
can be a problem.
Yeah, it forms part of the construction management plan. That will be one of the conditions.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just one other quick question. You're the architect, aren't you? I think, yeah. It was just about paragraph 4.5 says that it just notes that there's no level access to the property at all. And I just wondered if that's correct, and if there's a reason why there couldn't be level access, at least on the ground floor.
I don't believe that is correct, actually. There's no level access to the front of the building because of the existing facade. However, we will be able to provide level access at the back.
That's great. Thanks for confirming.
Councillor Webb?
The communal garden, how is that managed? Is that by the same company that manages the students and the tenants? Is that, people are nodding at me, so that's fine. Because obviously that's an area that students are not going to have.
Yeah, it will be managed by CRM. I'm not sure if they intend to have, say, cameras on it that they can monitor remotely or not at this stage.
Okay, can't see any further questions there, so thank you for your time this evening. And yeah, if we move on then to any further questions for Gareth and Councillor Webb and Councillor Crawford.
Gareth, I've just been looking through the conditions regarding a construction management plan, and I can't find one. I might be just missing it. There's a.
So the truth, it's the scale of development that we wouldn't normally put a full construction environment management plan. It's two, effectively, it's a conversion of two relatively small extensions. So we wouldn't recommend it.
I think I'll make the point now and then we can discuss it later in debate. I just, given the fact that this is on quite a tight end of the street, on, as I said, open onto quite a busy road, with res parking in the area and things like that, would that not be sort of mitigating circumstances to consider a construction management plan? I mean, we've just heard from the people in favour of it that would be something they'd look at.
Well, I guess the fact that it's res park and double yellow lines gives the council the opportunity to manage it more effectively through their parking management service than the planning enforcement service. So issuing an enforcement notice with a 3-month compliance period doesn't really help on parking transgressions. So, and there will inevitably be periods where they need to unload building materials from the street and scaffold. Scaffolding licenses are issued through the council, and there is that control there. And there is room for a vehicle to pass, a parked vehicle outside the frontage. I went that way specifically on the way into the office to check that one out. But if members are concerned, I wouldn't suggest a full construction environment management plan, but if there's a management plan, we have management plans specifically for car parking and unloading of construction vehicles and things like that, which members could impose if they thought it was necessary.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to just finish up on the point around the viability of the pub and just understand, again, paragraph 5.6 from the council's, the planning authority's perspective. Just towards the end of that paragraph, there's a line that says, requiring the applicant to advertise the pub differently or for a longer period is unlikely to give the council a better insight into the viability of the Castle Howard Ox. And then you've noted that it was, you've received evidence that it was advertised as a pub, but I'm not convinced that we've had evidence that it's met the policy HW1 in terms of being advertised for a year, which we obviously at some point previously have agreed is an appropriate amount of time to make sure that we've kind of flushed out that. And then the next sentence says, furthermore, bearing in mind the close proximity of other public houses, and it's plural. I'm just trying to sort of get my head on the area, because a bit further up that it's just talks about the pub, the punch bowl as being the kind of the competition, and the punch bowl is the reason why the pub wasn't viable. And obviously the punch bowl has now closed, and okay, the operators are suggesting that they're hoping that it will reopen, but I would suggest that the operators who closed this pub in 2017 may have been suggesting that they hoped it would reopen. And I'm just wondering whether that has any bearing or any consideration for us, given that this is, if you take it as read that pubs are generally valued community facilities, and we're potentially looking at this area not having any, what's the implication for that planning balance within that? Because if we've given weight to the fact that there is another nearby pub, which now doesn't exist potentially.
Well, the Punch Bowl exists as a pub with a lawful use as a pub that would require planning permission to be granted for it to be used as any other use. There are others in relatively close proximity on Gilligate, on Monkgate as well, the two pubs on Monkgate. So there are alternatives generally in the area. I think what the officer at the top of page 27, I think what the officer is saying is that requiring a further we don't feel that requiring a further 5 months of marketing is likely to, given what the marketing report said about the number of bids and the fact that no bid was received to take the pub as a pub in that preceding 7 months, and we know the premises have suffered from high turnover of tenants, and it was felt that it was unlikely to be a viable tenanted pub. We didn't feel that on balance there would be anything gained from requiring an additional period of marketing. Added to the fact that there are other pubs in the area, fortunate timing that the one that is closest by has closed, but there is a marketing board on that property at the moment and renovations being undertaken inside as well. Saw today.
So if I may just clarify, sorry, Chair. So are we effectively accepting that this is a breach of policy HW1? Because it does seem to me quite clear that it states that the loss of community facilities will only be permitted when they have been marketed for a minimum of a year without success. But we're saying in the planning balance, we accept that it's a breach of policy HW1 because there's other things which we consider to outweigh it.
Yeah. The justification to HW1 in terms of marketing, it does talk about a minimum of a year without success. So that's right. The policy has other strands to it. It does talk about facilities of equivalent or greater capacity or quality are provided off-site in a location that equivalently or better serves the local community needs, or the facilities no longer serve a community function and I'm not going to be able to say this word, and can demonstrate, it doesn't say that, they cannot be adapted to meet other community needs. I suppose that's not really relevant in this case. So yeah, we've applied the policy, we've looked at alternatives, we've taken into account that they haven't fully marketed it in terms of what the policy says, but we feel that on the basis of all the facts that we have, then that's a reasonable judgment in this case.
And just to really kind of finally test you, I suppose, I just want to be really clear, because that word only, which to me, you know, often in these sort of things, the narrative policy will say should not be, or, you know, something that gives a little bit more flexibility. Whereas to me, that says, you know, the loss of a community facilities will only be permitted when they've been marketed. Is that the wording of the policy as written, HW1, or is that the wording as it's been drafted in this report? Because I think
yeah, that is not a direct quote. So the policy says that development proposals which involve the loss of existing community facilities or facilities last used for community purposes will not be supported unless it can be demonstrated that. And then there's a series of ors, and then the last or says, in the case of commercial facilities, evidence is provided that demonstrates that the facilities are no longer viable. And then in 610, which is 610 of the local plan, which isn't part of the policy, it's the justification and the explanation. The final part of that sentence says evidence that facilities have been marketed for a minimum of a year without success will be required to demonstrate they are unviable.
So because it says at the start of paragraph 5.6, no financial information has been submitted about the profitability of the pub. So we haven't met the first test of what you said, which was, you know, and it's demonstrated that the facility is not viable because we haven't received anything about the profitability of the pub. We're just going on the say-so. And we haven't met the second test of the policy, which says it has to be marketed for 12 months because we've got demonstrated that it's been marketed for 7 months, and then we're told that it was marketed prior to that, but we haven't got evidence for that either.
Mm.
Would that be your understanding?
Well, it's not been, the evidence of financial viability is normally the marketing of the property.
For the sale of the property, but the facility, as I understand it, as you just read it, HW1 says if a facility to be changed or to be something else is demonstrating that either that the facility is not viable or that it's been marketed for 12 months.
It's usually just the marketing, because other operators can come along and make premises that, as we've seen with pubs in the past, premises that the pub companies with large estates don't consider themselves to be viable. So that's why we require marketing rather than just a set of books which say the place is struggling. Well, the place might struggle because it's not well managed. So we would normally just require, in terms of viability, demonstrating it's not viable, then that would normally be the marketing process.
Okay, I'm sure that's something we can weigh. I don't want to labour it further, but thank you.
Councillor Cracken.
Sorry, I was going to keep this to comments, but actually I think I'd just like to hear what Gareth's response is. It's a completely different aspect. It's about the size of the studios. And I know this is a difficult one, and I think I know there are not any and statutory, there's not much in the way of statutory space standards we can use. There is something, but in planning anyway. For example, I noted that in an earlier iteration, there were 4 studios in the roof, and that was changed to 2, which now means that there's, instead of 6 on the first floor, there's 7. And while some of them look like they are quite a reasonable space and layout for a studio, others look extremely crammed in, where people have their cooking facilities right next to their beds, or just behind, feet away from their beds. I just wondered if you could comment on how you've assessed the sort of amenity of new residents.
Well, we don't, as you said, we don't have space standards for student accommodation. There are a range of sizes. There's one studio which is 24 square meters, and one of the smaller ones is I think the smallest one is 15 square meters, which is on the first floor. So they're broadly between that upper teens, lower 20s in terms of their square meterage. I guess because it's a conversion, it has to be knitted into the existing fabric, and the asymmetrical shape of the building doesn't make it so straightforward as opposed to a new build where it's a very simple matter of designing on a grid. So there are constraints, and I think those constraints probably lead to the difference in sizes. I don't have a handle, I'm afraid, on whether 14.3 meters is considered to be unnecessarily small. The case officer didn't feel so, and I'm not sure any of the comments or some of the public comments have said they're reasonable, but some of them are small, but it's not been recommended for refusal on the basis that some of the units are smaller than others. I guess ultimately the market may decide whether those are lettable, and the amount of money they're let for.
Councillor Webb?
On that same point, Gareth, maybe you could illuminate us a little on similar student developments. For example, we've mentioned earlier the coal works, but then there are other ones around the city. Is this a reasonably standard size floor space? Are these on the smaller end or the larger end, or where are they?
In terms of numbers, I can only for floor spaces, I can only think of the scheme that was recently at planning committee on the former plumbers merchants on Fawcett Street, and those I believe those are about 21, generally 21 square meters, but that's a new build premises. And as part of because the issue of the size of those units was brought up at the meeting, I think the officer had found space standards at other authorities, and that at another authority, and that 20 meters was what they were looking at. But that, as I say, the issue is here that this is a conversion. So I think those smaller ones, the smaller flats, are within the converted area, and I guess there's it probably would have been a better question for the architect, but there will be a balance of numbers versus floor space in terms of viability. But we don't feel that any of those spaces appear to be unduly small. But I don't have any. My memory doesn't hold the floor spaces of all the other purpose-built student accommodation, I'm afraid. Those years have passed me.
Yeah, I mean, we try to avoid reopening, but yeah, very briefly, if you've got a comment, then.
Yeah, I can say that on the coal yard, the phase one that we did, the studios there are 16 square meters consistently, but that was a new build. On this, the smallest unit is 15.7, and they go up to about 22 something. CRM, who manage that and manage a number of schemes around the country, quite happy at 16.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't see any further questions there, so if we're happy then to move into debate. If anybody would like to make a start. Just sort of avoiding my eyes. So. And Councillor Crawshaw.
I'll jump in if nobody else is keen to. I feel that this, unfortunately, is another example of pub operators seeing their buildings as assets that they can turn over for quick profit. And I think that that is what is happening here. I think we quite clearly haven't met the terms of local plan policy HW1. And if we are putting in policies, then we ought to stick to those policies. And I think that if we have received financial information submitting that the profitability of the pub was not viable in 2017, then it might be a slightly different situation. I think the fact that the area will have lost potentially all of its pubs in 6 months or a year's time is of concern. I think that there's a line in here which says that you know, one of the things we should be balancing is whether this is making a positive contribution and particularly to sustainable communities. And I'm not somebody who doesn't agree with student accommodation as a general rule. I think that it's really appropriate to have student accommodation in different parts of the city. And generally speaking, I'm not averse to student accommodation as I say, as a general rule, but I don't think you can use an argument that this is adding to a sustainable community by having an inherently transient population as your alternative to a community facility. And I note, I do understand that, you know, these are areas where it may have been difficult for pubs and, you know, that presents a set of challenges. But if you market a building to the highest bidder, it will always go to a development opportunity, always. And we clearly haven't met the terms of the policy around retaining community facilities wherever we wish to. So I think on that basis, I will move refusal. And I think if they, you know, the applicant is coming back somewhere down the line, having met the terms of the policy of HW1, then we might have a more difficult decision to make around it. But until such time, I certainly wouldn't support this as a development.
Thank you. Is anybody willing to second that? Councillor.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll second it. And I did share some of the concerns that were expressed around the size and layout of some of the rooms. I don't think they'll have good amenity for residents when bathrooms and kitchens and beds and kitchens are in such close proximity. It was quite a concern as well.
Yes, I mean, I have been through the debate a bit unsure about which side to come down on, because obviously the building as it currently is not an attractive asset to the area. So that is a consideration, and it obviously is in a good location to be student residences in one sense. But I do think, you know, and I acknowledge there are positive aspects, and clearly quite a bit of work has gone into some of those. But I do think on the other hand, there are question marks over community facilities, you know, what's needed in this area. If there's a question mark over the punch bowl, that does, you know, increase that concern. But I am particularly concerned about the amenity of new residents. I think I sympathise with some of the objections that it is overdevelopment, and that it is really being crammed in with some very small studios in there. I'm also not entirely sure about the management, about how that is actually going to work and what impact that's going to have. So I think on a balance, I probably will come down in favour of refusal and see what else can be brought back, really.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. As a member of Camera, I've had to keep out of this so far when we're talking about viability, but I'm going to point out the history of the pubs in this area. I lived in Brownlow Street for a couple of years in the 80s, and there were 4 pubs in the area. There was the Magpie, which closed in 2004, was found to be totally non-viable. The Reindeer closed in 2009, that was found to be totally non-viable. Castle Howard Ox has never really thrived. It's never been a particularly busy pub, and it finally closed in 2017. And now we're seeing the Punch Bowl, which I think its closure is more to do with management than to do with its viability. Some areas of York have a thriving pub culture. This part of York never has. It's all the pubs around this area and the groves have all struggled. I don't think that delaying this by a year to go through a viability study will actually serve any useful purpose. I think if it had been a viable pub, it would have been reopened. Looking at the actual details of the accommodation, I think it's more than adequate. Yes, you could argue some of the rooms could be a little bit bigger, but because it's not a new build, it's fitted to the outline of an existing building. I think the rooms are reasonably well designed. They are all en suite as far as I can make out. Certainly, they're a lot better than I had at university, although I appreciate standards have come on a long time in the 150 years since I was a student, or however long it is. I personally will not be voting for refusal. I would support, I will be voting, well, I would be voting to approve this, were that on the table.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really torn on this one because I think that Councillor Fisher's, made some good points. What I would say is that you mentioned the magpie, you mentioned the reindeer. They were found, you said it yourself, they were found to be non-viable. And the point of the proposal that's in front of us that Councillor Crawshaw's just made is that this hasn't technically been found to be not viable. Had this application come to us like 5 months further down the line, and so we didn't have the 7 months, we had the 12 months, I think it would be a different situation. My major concern is over the resident amenity, though. I think for the actual residents who are going to live there, for the students who are going to live there, having such a small space that encompasses everything, your toilet, your bathroom, your kitchen, your bed, within a space, let's face it, is not far off this table, is quite extreme, really. And I recognise, however, that the market might accept that, and that actually that's perfectly fine. And my final point would be that the Castle Howard Ox has been left and allowed to fall into a state of disrepair since 2017, which, I think has had an incredibly negative impact on its future viability. And I think that in itself is quite a problem. So I do think that there's a real difficulty here, because I think that actually the architecture, the proposal that's been put forward, I think is an improvement to the structure of the building from the outside. I potentially would have preferred to have seen fewer flats inside. I think pushing for 16 is probably too many. But in terms of planning law, the only thing that we can really consider, I suppose, is the points that Councillor Crawshaw's made about whether this has been marketed properly and for the right length of time. I'm not saying it's not been marketed properly, but for the actual length of time that it should have been. And I think that's the thing that we need to be concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess in terms of the planning law, it's in accordance with the plan unless material and sort of evidence indicates otherwise. And I think you probably could argue that having received 12 bids, which none of them were to do with the pub as a sort of ongoing concern, that would be a material consideration in that consideration. The other point just to make is I'm slightly concerned perhaps that we might be getting sort of slightly off track in terms of the office, the way it's been kind of phrased in the officer's report. So I think the series of ors in HW1, some of them are, if I sort of read them out. So it's development proposals which involve the loss of existing community facilities or facilities last used for community purposes will not be supported unless it can be demonstrated that facilities of equivalent or greater capacity and quality are provided elsewhere on the site, or facilities of equivalent or greater capacity and quality are provided off-site in a location that equivalently or better serves the local community's needs, or the facilities no longer serve a community function and demonstrably cannot be adapted to meet other community needs, or in the case of commercial facilities, evidence is provided that demonstrates the facilities are no longer financially viable. So I think even if you made the case that the sort of financial viability aspect of that hasn't been met, there's still a case in terms of the off-site provision, other local pubs near the area, or indeed that the facility itself no longer would suit the purpose, you know, of a pub, and part of that presumably is the sort of derelict state of it at the moment. So I think those, you know, those are two other aspects. Perhaps you wouldn't necessarily want to rely too much on the viability, where you could look at those two aspects as well, or at least that's my opinion. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I think the distinction I would draw is that those three further, or the first three ors, are relating specifically to a community facility. The fourth point, which is specifically around a commercial facility, commercial community facility, isn't it? And so I think that's where there is a distinction in terms of if it is a commercial facility as opposed to, say, a youth club or a library or, you know, what have you, because we're talking in a slightly what's the right way of putting it? You know, this is a policy which is around a community facility, which is a catch-all policy for what we mean by community facilities. And in the report, paragraph 5.5, it acknowledges that valued facilities includes pubs, and I think we'd all agree that, you know, pubs are community facilities, but there is a specific reference in that policy around commercial, and that's, I think, where I think there's an issue here. Because if you say that something is a community facility and you market it, a community facility necessarily will have a lower commercial value often than if you are marketing something as a development opportunity. And I think that's what the thrust of HW1 is trying to get at, so that you can't essentially buy a prime location that happens to be a pub or a library or something and close it down and say, hey, let's open it up to the highest bidder to make what you want to of it, because no community facility will ever be able to compete with somebody who wants to go for a residential.
Councillor Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have to see this in the context of the demise of pubs nationally, really. I think that is driven very much by the supermarkets making available alcohol at quite late periods into the night. Looking at sort of the size of the rooms, I went to university, perhaps more recently than Councillor Fisher, but I must say that my study bedroom was very much smaller than some of these on there. I admit that we had a separate bathrooms and toilets and so on, but even so, it was quite adequate. And I think as a student, some of those coming to the city will appreciate some of the smaller spaces perhaps because they're more affordable. I suspect the person who's in the 15.7 metre unit will be paying rather less than the one in the 22, 24 metre. I don't think it's realistic to see this pub used again as a pub. I think it's just unlikely. I do remember when it was open, it went through a difficult period or two during its time, especially given the proximity of the punch bowl around the corner, which is probably in very much better condition than the Castle Howard Ox is at the moment. And therefore, I think this is probably the best use for it going forward as a community use, if you like, but a slightly broader concept. I should be voting for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can see no more comments at this point, so I guess we're happy then to move to a vote on the proposal which has been put to us already, but I'll just ask Gareth before we get there to perhaps clarify the reasons that are put forward for the refusal. And
I think the reason is that the proposed change of use is contrary to policy HW1 because it's not been demonstrated that the pub is unviable as required by the wording of the policy, and therefore it would undermine council policies and the MPPF in terms of providing for sustainable communities and the ability for communities to be able to for facilities to be able to provide for the day-to-day needs of those communities.
Yeah, happy with that, but I think it was specifically about failing to make a positive contribution to sustainable communities. Because I think it's about saying if you're going to remove an asset and you can't demonstrate that it's making a positive contribution, because if it was making a positive contribution, that would be something that might weigh against the loss of the asset.
Okay, if we're ready then, if I could just ask Gareth House just to read out the two reasons we've got again, and then I'll.
It's just one.
Sorry,
just one reason, which is that it's not been demonstrated that the pub is unviable as required by policy HW1, and the proposed use would also fail to make a positive contribution to a sustainable community.
So, Councillor Crackhill.
Can we, sorry, can we not add in a second one about concern about overdevelopment and impact on the amenity of future occupants?
My advice remains that I can't see how we would be able to defend that refusal reason. We haven't got a policy which sets room sizes. As the architect says, we have approved schemes in the city with floor areas in the teens. 10 or more of the studios, no, sorry, 10 are very close or exceed 20 square meters. There's one which is 15.3 on my schedule, I think it is. There's a couple of others which are 17 square meters, one which is 18. There's a range of sizes. And I don't think we could, I can't envisage how I could fight an appeal on the basis of a couple of the studios being smaller than the mean, maybe, the average. But I'm only advising you, I'm not the decision maker.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you. I don't think it's just about floor sizes, about, you know, for example, direct if you're directly comparing it to other places with similar floor sizes, I think those had much more by way of shared amenities, like maybe more shared kitchen space, maybe better larger laundry facilities, other local facilities, and overdevelopment is also about what was discussed about everyone moving in and out at the same time. It's about the total number of occupants in the total amount of space, not just the amount of floor space per occupant.
Councillor Fisher?
I simply don't see how we could conceivably sustain that when we approved 83 student flats. I think we had 3 or 4 communal areas. This is 16-1. I don't see how we can possibly justify that in the decision we made on the Plum site about 2 months ago. I think we're treading on very tricky grounds in terms of defending an appeal if we go down that line.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess we've reached the end of the line really on that suggestion, unless there's any kind of specifics that people feel could be sort of put forward, because yeah, Gareth makes the best efforts, I think, sometimes to fit what's said to policies, but I think we're coming up a total blank there, really. Councillor Crawshaw?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think whilst I look at this and think, blimey, there's an awful lot of stuff crammed in, I think I'm inclined to agree, regrettably, about the overdevelopment. I think it's difficult to make that case. I think I would just remind members about the Carlton Tavern, which was deemed unviable and we refused, and has gone on to thrive. And I think that, to my mind, there is a clear policy which we haven't met the test of. And that is neater, you know, it's a test, you know, have you met that policy? I don't think we have. That's a grounds to refuse. I think that's a defendable grounds to refuse. And I think it gives an opportunity for a community facility to be retained rather than simply shut down and redeveloped.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're ready though to move to the vote on that. I think we've heard, haven't we, from Gareth what exactly we're voting on, so everybody should be clear. So if I could see then all those in favour of the proposal and all those against. Okay. Yep, thank you. So I'm afraid that is refused.
Could you clarify that that was on your casting vote, was it?
No, it's 5-4.
Oh, was it 5-4? Sorry, I couldn't see. I was looking down.
Yep, so there's no other business on the agenda this evening, so thank members.
Do you not need you need to move, Chair? Chair. It's been refused. It hasn't been approved.
That's what I said. I said refused. Your proposal.
You're all right. You've done
Oh, well done. Sorry, apologies. Apologies. I misunderstood which way that went.
No, I'm really.
So we're closing. Yep, thank you, everybody.